Can I fix it for mood?
Awesome.
A mood?
Can I fix it for food? They laughed at the homeless black girl, not knowing she's a Motorhead. The streets were unkind, filled with laughter that pierced deeper than hunger ever could. A young girl, only 14, wandered along the cracked sidewalk with a weary gait. Her beige shirt, once bright, now hung on her frame, torn and soiled with days of dirt. A faded backpack clung to her shoulders, though it carried little more than scraps and useless junk. Hunger had hollowed her face, and every step felt heavier than the last. The sharp aroma of fried chicken and warm bread drifted through the air, wrapping around her like a cruel temptation. She followed the scent until she stood before a glowing restaurant at the corner. Inside, trays of steaming food moved swiftly from kitchen to tables. Her eyes widened, reflecting both longing and desperation. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking under the weight of her empty stomach. "I'll work. I can wash dishes, mop the floors, anything. Just, please, one plate." The owner, a thick-set man in a grease-stained apron, glared down at her. His lip curled in disdain. "We're not a charity. Get lost." "I'll work for it," she repeated, her trembling hands gripping the straps of her backpack. "Did you not hear me?" he barked, shoving her shoulder with surprising force. She stumbled backward, landing hard on the pavement outside. Two customers waiting in line chuckled. One muttered under his breath, "What a pest." Another, emboldened by the cruelty, laughed louder. "Look at her, begging like some stray dog." The words cut her deeply, more than the gnawing pain in her belly. She clenched her fists tightly, forcing herself not to cry where they could see her weakness. Lifting her chin just enough to hide her tears, she turned away. Every step away from the warm lights of the restaurant was heavier than the last, her pride battered, but not broken. Then, just as despair threatened to swallow her whole, a sharp sound stopped her in her tracks. Metal clanked, followed by a frustrated curse and a chorus of laughter. Her eyes darted toward the noise. Parked in front of a repair shop was a luxury sedan, its hood propped open. 4 men circled the car, frustration written across their faces. The first was an older mechanic, grey-haired and grease-streaked, gripping a wrench with tired hands. He smirked, his laugh lines twisting into mockery. Beside him, a younger mechanic leaned against the car, arms folded, already shaking his head in amusement. To the left, a black mechanic in navy coveralls wiped sweat from his brow, a wide grin plastered on his face. And standing apart from the others was the car's owner, a tall man in a crisp suit and a red tie. His polished shoes gleamed under the streetlight. Arms folded, he radiated smug authority. His laugh rang the loudest of all. The girl slowed her pace, her eyes catching details the men seemed to miss, the belt hanging loose, a cable out of place. Something stirred inside her, a memory of her father's voice. "Engines talk if you listen, kiddo. Don't fear the noise. Understand it." Her stomach twisted again, and before she could stop herself, the words slipped out. Can I fix it for food?" The sudden silence that followed her words was almost deafening. For half a heartbeat, all 4 men stared at her in disbelief. Then, as if on cue, their laughter returned, louder and sharper than before. The man in the suit slapped his thigh, amusement sparkling in his eyes. "Did you hear that? This little beggar thinks she can fix my car." The older mechanic chuckled, shaking his head. "Sweetheart, this isn't some toy wagon. This is a V8 engine. You probably don't even know what that means." The younger mechanic leaned forward, sneering. "Where's your toolbox, huh? In that filthy backpack of yours." The black mechanic nearly doubled over, laughing. "Girl, you couldn't even lift one of these wrenches. What are you going to do, blow on it and hope it starts?" Their laughter blended together, forming a wall of humiliation that pressed down on her small frame. Her cheeks flushed red, but her voice did not waver. "I'm not joking," she said firmly, though her stomach betrayed her with a loud growl. "I can fix it, just one meal, that's all I ask." The man in the suit stepped forward, looking her up and down with disdain, as though she were a stain on his polished shoes. A plate of food. For you to break my car. Do you even hear yourself? You're starving because you're useless. Cars need skill, not childish dreams. His words cut deep, reopening wounds she had tried to bury. Yet her hunger and pride fused together into something stronger. She squared her shoulders. I know what I'm doing. I watched my father fix cars until the day he was gone. I learned in garages, in junkyards, anywhere I could. I've practiced. I can help you. The older mechanic barked out a laugh. Practiced on what? Broken down bikes? Abandoned junk? Get out of here before someone drags you off. But her stomach growled again, louder this time, and even they couldn't ignore it. The laughter faltered for a brief second. Her eyes stung with unshed tears, but she forced her voice to stay steady. You want to laugh? Fine. But I'll tell you this. Give me one chance. If I fail, I walk away hungry. But if I fix it, you owe me food. The younger mechanic snorted. What's next? You'll want a job here? The black mechanic chuckled, elbowing the older one. Bet she doesn't even know where the spark plugs are. The suited man tilted his head, lips curling into a predator's grin. All right then, beggar girl. You fix this, you eat. But when you fail, don't cry. You asked for it. Their mocking laughter filled the shop again, echoing off the concrete walls. Still, the girl's voice cut through it with surprising strength. Give me one chance, that's all I ask. The older mechanic smirked, tossing her a heavy wrench. Go ahead, sweetheart, show us what you've got. Her small hands gripped the tool. She stepped closer to the engine, her chest tightening as heat from the hood rolled into her face. But she forced herself to focus. Her father's voice whispered in memory. Engines talk if you listen, and she listened, and... The girl leaned over the open hood, the scent of hot oil filling her nose. Her fingers wrapped tightly around the wrench, trembling only slightly. Her eyes scanned the tangle of belts, wires, and metal, searching with an instinct sharpened by memory. There, she whispered. Her voice was soft, but steady enough to catch the attention of the older mechanic. The belt is misaligned, she said louder this time. That's why it keeps slipping when you try to start it. And the ignition wire isn't seated properly. Whoever worked on this last didn't tighten it right. The men blinked at her. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then the younger mechanic burst out laughing. Lucky guess. The black mechanic smirked but shifted uneasily. Wait, she actually pointed at the right parts. The older mechanic's smirk faded ever so slightly. He squinted at the belt, then back at the girl. His silence was louder than their laughter. Ignoring them, the girl slid her small hands into the engine compartment. Her fingers worked with practiced confidence, tugging the loose cable free, then reseating it firmly into place. She checked the belt, repositioning it with precise movements that betrayed far more experience than her age suggested. The black mechanic crossed his arms, frown deepening. She's doing it right? The younger one scoffed again, though his grin was slipping. She's just copying what she's seen, doesn't mean it'll work. The suited man forced out a laugh, though unease flickered in his eyes. She's bluffing. Start it then. Let's see if she really knows. The girl stepped back, her forehead damp with sweat. She wiped her hands on her shirt, leaving streaks of grease across the faded fabric. Try it now. The younger mechanic rolled his eyes and slid into the driver's seat. This'll be good. He twisted the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life. Not a sputter, not a weak cough. A full, powerful roar that filled the shop, echoing like thunder. Silence fell. The younger mechanic froze, his mouth hanging open. The black mechanic let out a long whistle, eyebrows raised in disbelief. The suited man's smug grin vanished entirely, replaced with a tight jaw. The older mechanic just stared at her, eyes narrowing. "Who taught you that?" he finally asked, his voice quieter than before. The girl clutched the wrench against her chest, her throat tightening. "My father. He used to fix cars, before he was gone." The old man's eyes softened. "What was his name?" Her lips trembled, but she forced the words out. "David Carter." The wrench slipped from the older mechanic's hand, clattering loudly against the concrete floor. He stepped closer, eyes burning into hers. "David Carter," he repeated, almost in a whisper. I knew that name. Never met him, but every mechanic in this town did. People said he had golden hands, could make an engine sing. His voice cracked. What happened to him? Her eyes welled up with tears. He got sick. We couldn't afford treatment. I was 12 when I lost him. The shop fell utterly silent. The air in the repair shop grew heavy, silence pressing down on everyone present. The mocking smirks that once danced across the men's faces were gone. The younger mechanic lowered his eyes, suddenly ashamed of his earlier words. The black mechanic rubbed the back of his neck, shifting uncomfortably. Even the suited man who had laughed the loudest had no clever remark left. The older mechanic finally broke the silence. He stepped closer, his grease-stained hand trembling slightly. Resting it gently on the girl's shoulder, he spoke with a quiet respect that none of them had expected. "Kid, you carry his blood. No wonder you saw it faster than any of us." Her lips parted, but no words came. She only blinked, trying to hold back the tears threatening to spill. For the first time in what felt like years, the laughter aimed at her had stopped. The suited man cleared his throat, breaking the fragile stillness. "You fixed my car, you earned your food." His tone carried no mockery this time. He pointed toward the diner across the street. "Get her whatever she wants." The younger mechanic, eager to correct himself, sprinted toward the restaurant. Moments later, he returned with a steaming plate of fried chicken, bread, and a cold drink. He handed it to her without a word, his earlier arrogance now replaced by guilt. The girl sat on the curb just outside the shop. Her hands trembled as she tore into the food, each bite devoured with a hunger she could no longer suppress. Tears slid down her cheeks as the flavors filled her mouth. But these tears were different, tears of relief, of victory. For once she wasn't being laughed at. The men stood nearby, watching in silence. No one dared disturb her as she ate. The black mechanic shifted his weight, glancing at the others. "She's tough," he muttered under his breath. When the plate was finally empty, the older mechanic crouched down beside her, his lined face softened, eyes glistening, as if seeing something he thought long lost. "Alina, right?" he asked gently. She nodded, her voice too choked to answer. "You've got your father's gift," he said, his voice cracking. "Don't waste it. There'll always be a place in a shop like this for someone like you." The younger mechanic nodded firmly. "Come back tomorrow, sweep the floor, watch us work. You'll learn." The black mechanic added quietly, "And you'll eat. We won't let you starve." Alina clutched the straps of her backpack, overwhelmed. The kindness she had begged for earlier was now freely offered, not out of pity but respect. She had walked in as a starving beggar mocked by grown men. Now she was leaving full, valued, and carrying the spark of her father's legacy. As she stood, the older mechanic watched her go. His voice was low, almost a whisper meant only for himself. "David, you'd be proud." The night air was cool as Alina stepped away from the shop, her backpack bouncing lightly against her shoulders. For the first time in days, her stomach wasn't clawing at her insides. Every bite she had eaten sat warm in her chest, filling more than just hunger. It filled a part of her spirit that had been fading. But with each step down the dimly lit street, her thoughts returned to her father. His voice echoed in her memory, gentle yet firm. "Engines don't lie, kiddo. They'll tell you what's wrong if you listen close enough." She had listened, and tonight it had saved her. Still, uncertainty gnawed at her. A single meal didn't change the fact that she was homeless, that her nights were spent on cold concrete or under bridges where the city's noise never truly quieted. Yet the mechanic's words clung to her like a lifeline. "Don't waste it. You'll always find a place in a shop like this." She found herself whispering into the darkness, "Would you be proud of me, Dad?" Her voice cracked as her throat tightened. "I fixed it. I really did." Tears welled again, but she brushed them away. She hated crying. Crying didn't change anything. Strength did. By the time she reached the broken steps of the abandoned building she had been sleeping in, exhaustion pulled at her bones. She tucked herself into her usual corner, laying her backpack beneath her head as a pillow. The city hummed outside, car horns and distant laughter spilling into the night. Yet for once, She fell asleep, not with despair, but with a flicker of hope. Morning came with the sound of footsteps. Alina stirred, startled, clutching her backpack close. A pair of children peeked in through the doorway, wide-eyed. They whispered and giggled before running off, leaving her sitting upright, heart pounding. She hated the looks, whether mocking or pitying. They reminded her of how far she had fallen. But then she remembered the promise. Come back tomorrow. She hesitated. What if they had only said it out of guilt? What if they laughed at her again? Doubt twisted inside her, nearly convincing her to stay hidden. Then her father's voice rose in her mind once more. Courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about showing up even when you are. Taking a deep breath, she stood, brushed off her clothes and began walking. At the shop, the smell of oil and metal welcomed her. The men were already working, tools clattering against steel. When the younger mechanic spotted her at the doorway, he froze for a moment. Then, without a word, he grabbed a broom leaning against the wall and held it out to her. You came back, he said, almost like a statement of respect. Alina took the broom with both hands. I said I would. The older mechanic glanced up from under the hood of a car. His expression softened and he gave her a single approving nod. For the first time in a long while, she felt she belonged somewhere. The morning passed slowly, filled with the steady rhythm of tools clinking and engines humming. Alina swept the shop floor, moving carefully between the men as they worked. Dust, screws and bits of wire scraped beneath her broom. Though the task was simple, she poured herself into it, determined not to appear as just a charity case. From time to time, her eyes wandered to the cars, curiosity tugging at her. She watched the older mechanic tighten bolts with precise turns, the younger one checking spark plugs, and the black mechanic flushing out a radiator. Each movement fascinated her, the confidence in their hands, the way they seemed to know exactly what to do. Her fingers itched to hold tools again. At one point she crouched down to collect stray bolts scattered near the workbench. Picking one up, she turned it between her fingers, remembering how her father used to explain every little part. Even the smallest piece matters, kiddo. Cars aren't just machines, they're puzzles. Miss one piece and the whole thing suffers. She swallowed hard. The ache of missing him had never left, but today it felt different, less like despair, more like purpose. The younger mechanic glanced at her as she worked. His voice carried less mockery than before, though a hint of testing lingered. You really think you can do what we do? Fix cars day in and day out? Alina met his gaze, standing straighter. I don't think. I know. I just need a chance. The black mechanic chuckled, though his tone was not cruel. Bold words for someone sweeping the floor. Before she could respond, the older mechanic set down his wrench with a loud clang. He studied her quietly for a moment, then motioned her over. Come here. Her heart leapt. She dropped the broom and hurried to his side, nerves buzzing. He gestured toward the engine in front of him, a dusty pickup truck that had clearly seen better days. Tell me what's wrong with it. Alina froze. She hadn't expected to be tested so soon. Peering into the hood, she scanned the engine, her mind racing. The men watched closely, waiting for her to stumble. At first, all she saw was a mess of metal and wires, but then she closed her eyes and heard her father's words again. Engines talk if you listen. Don't rush. Just listen. Opening her eyes, she leaned closer. The faint smell of fuel lingered, and she noticed a thin crack along one of the hoses. The fuel line's leaking, she said carefully, and the filter's clogged. That's why it struggles to start. The older mechanic's eyebrows lifted. He looked at the hose, then back at her, his lips pressed into a thin line. The younger mechanic leaned over too, disbelief flickering across his face. She's right. The black mechanic gave a low whistle. Kids got sharp eyes. The older man finally spoke, his voice heavy with a mixture of surprise and admiration. Looks like yesterday wasn't luck after all. Alina's chest swelled with quiet pride. For the first time, they weren't laughing. The older mechanic handed Alina a rag. If you're going to point it out, you might as well help fix it. Her heart raced. She nodded quickly, wiping her hands before leaning closer to the engine. The black mechanic fetched a replacement hose, tossing it gently toward her. She caught it awkwardly but held on tight. "Think you can swap it out?" the younger mechanic asked, his voice carrying curiosity instead of mockery this time. "I can try," she replied, steadying her breath. Kneeling beside the truck, she loosened the clamps on the cracked fuel line. Her fingers slipped at first, the metal biting into her skin, but she gritted her teeth and kept working. She had done this before, back when her father still guided her hands in the garage. With careful precision, she slid the old line free and replaced it with the new one. She tightened the clamps, double-checking her work before stepping back. "Done," she said softly, almost unsure. The older mechanic leaned in, giving her work a close inspection. His silence stretched long enough for her stomach to twist nervously. Then, finally, he nodded. "Good." The younger mechanic climbed into the truck and turned the key. The engine coughed once, then growled to life, smoother than before. Alina's lips curled into the faintest smile. It wasn't just luck. She had fixed it. The black mechanic crossed his arms, grinning. "Not bad, kid, not bad at all." The younger one shot her a glance, a reluctant smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Guess you earned your broom break." Alina's shoulders straightened. For the first time in years, she felt seen, not as a beggar, but as someone who could do something. When lunchtime rolled around, the suited man from the day before appeared again, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement as he stepped into the shop. His car gleamed outside, running smoothly thanks to Alina's hands. He glanced at her, then at the men. "So, the beggar girl's still here?" His voice carried a trace of mockery, though softer than before. The older mechanic frowned. "She's not a beggar. She's David Carter's daughter, and she's got his gift." The suited man raised an eyebrow, folding his arms. "David Carter. I've heard the name. He was good, wasn't he?" "More than good," the black mechanic said firmly. "The man was a legend." The suited man's eyes lingered on Alina, narrowing as if reassessing her worth. "Interesting," he smirked. "Well, let's see how long she lasts. Fixing one car doesn't make a mechanic." Alina met his gaze, fire flickering in her eyes. "Then give me another chance." The shop grew quiet. The older mechanic looked at her with a mixture of concern and admiration. The suited man's smirk widened, amused by her boldness. "Very well," he said finally. "We'll see just how much of your father's blood you really carry." Alina's heart pounded, but she stood tall. She wasn't just begging for food anymore. She was fighting for her future. The suited man's challenge hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Alina's fingers curled into fists at her sides, but her voice stayed calm. "I'll prove it." The older mechanic wiped his hands on a rag, watching her with a measured look. "Careful, kid. Pride's a dangerous road." Alina met his eyes, steady. "It's not pride. It's survival." The black mechanic gave a small nod of respect at her words, while the younger one shifted uneasily, torn between doubt and belief. The suited man waved dismissively. "Fine. There's a delivery van out back that's been giving trouble for weeks. None of these so-called experts can get it running right. If you think you're special, fix that." The men exchanged glances, but no one spoke. Alina took a breath and followed him outside. The van sat beneath the shade of a rusted awning, its paint chipped and tires nearly bald. The hood was already up, wires tangled like vines. A faint smell of gasoline hung in the air. Alina approached cautiously, her heart pounding. She rested her hands on the edge of the hood and leaned in, listening. Not just with her ears, but with the memory of her father's teachings. "Engines are like people," he had said once, crouched beside her in their old garage. "When they're sick, they show signs. Listen to them, feel them, smell what's wrong. They'll always tell you if you pay attention." Closing her eyes, she inhaled deeply. The gasoline smell was stronger than it should have been. Her eyes drifted toward the fuel injector system. "The injectors are leaking," she murmured, "and the air filter's clogged." The suited man smirked. "Big words. Do something about it." Her small hands worked quickly. She removed the filter, coughing as dust burst into the air. It was thick with grime, the kind that could suffocate an engine. She tapped it against the ground until it released clouds of dirt. then brushed it clean as best as she could. It wasn't perfect, but it would breathe better. Next, she tightened the injector seals, her fingers slipping but persisting. Sweat dripped from her brow, but she didn't stop. She could almost hear her father whispering encouragement. "Slow and steady, Alina. Don't rush the fix. Respect the machine." Finally, she stepped back. "Try it now." The younger mechanic slid behind the wheel and turned the key. The van sputtered, coughed, then, miraculously, settled into a steady rumble. For a moment, no one spoke. The sound of the engine running strong filled the silence. The black mechanic let out a laugh of disbelief. "I'll be damned. She actually did it." The older mechanic's lips pressed into a thin line, but his eyes gleamed with pride. The suited man, however, only crossed his arms, unwilling to admit what was plain before them all. Two lucky guesses don't make her a prodigy. Anyone could stumble into the right fix. Alina looked him square in the eye, her voice quiet but strong. Luck doesn't repeat itself. The van's steady hum lingered in the air, daring anyone to deny what had just happened. Alina stood with her hands at her sides, trying not to tremble. The suited man's expression remained tight, but the mechanics exchanged looks. This wasn't something they could dismiss. The younger mechanic finally broke the silence. "That wasn't luck. She spotted it faster than I did." The black mechanic nodded, "and fixed it without hesitation. That's no stumble." The older mechanic studied Alina for a long moment, then let out a slow breath. "Your father really did teach you well." Alina's chest swelled, pride mixing with grief. She wanted to smile, but the ache of missing him weighed her down. "He taught me everything he could before I lost him." The shop grew quiet again, a hush of respect filling the space. The suited man finally turned away with a dismissive wave. "Fine. So she knows her way around an engine. But don't think this means she belongs here. She's still just a girl with no roof over her head." The words stung, but Alina held her ground. "I don't need pity, and I don't need charity. All I need is a chance to work, to learn, to prove myself." The older mechanic's eyes softened. "And maybe to eat," he added quietly, glancing at the suited man. The suited man said nothing, but his clenched jaw betrayed his discomfort. That evening, after the shop closed, the three mechanics lingered. Alina swept the floor once more, though her mind spun with doubt. Would they really let her stay? Or was this kindness temporary? The younger mechanic leaned against the counter, watching her. "You know, when you first walked in, I thought you were crazy. Just some kid pretending to know cars." Alina kept sweeping, not trusting her voice. "But you proved me wrong," he continued. "Twice. Not many people can do that." The black mechanic chuckled, scratching his chin. "She's got more guts than half the apprentices we've had here, and sharper eyes, too." The older mechanic finally spoke, his tone carrying the weight of finality. "She's staying, even if it's just small tasks at first. Every shop needs an extra pair of hands. And this one?" He nodded toward Alina. "This one's got her father's gift. It'd be a waste to throw her back on the streets." Alina froze, her broom mid-sweep. Slowly she looked up, her heart hammering in her chest. "You mean I can stay?" "For now," the older mechanic said. "But you'll have to earn it. No shortcuts, no excuses. You work, you learn, and you keep proving you deserve to be here." Alina's throat tightened, but she nodded fiercely. "I will. I promise." The black mechanic grinned. "Looks like we've got ourselves a new apprentice." The younger one smirked, though this time it wasn't cruel. "Guess I'll have to watch my back." Alina clutched the broom, her hands trembling, not from fear, but from something new. Hope. For the first time in years, she wasn't walking away empty-handed. She was walking toward a future. The following morning, Alina arrived earlier than anyone expected. The sun had barely risen, but she was already there, sitting on the curb outside the shop with her backpack hugged against her chest. She hadn't slept much, The excitement of possibility had kept her awake. When the black mechanic arrived first, coffee in hand, he chuckled at the sight of her. "Kid, you beat me here. That's either dedication or desperation." "Both," Alina said honestly. He grinned, shaking his head as he unlocked the shop. "Good answer." Inside, the day began with routine jobs, oil changes, tire rotations, and minor repairs. The mechanics moved swiftly, their hands sure and practiced. Alina watched everything, her eyes darting from one task to another, memorizing every detail. She swept, fetched tools when asked, and handed out rags, but more than anything, she absorbed. The older mechanic noticed her watching closely as he worked on a carburetor. Without looking up, he said, "Curiosity's good, but remember, watching isn't the same as doing. One day soon, I'll let you try. Until then, learn with your eyes." "I am," Alina replied softly. By midday, her stomach growled, but before the ache could deepen, the younger mechanic slid a sandwich across the counter toward her. "Don't make a big deal out of it," he muttered, almost embarrassed. "Just eat." Alina stared at it for a moment, her throat tightening. "Thank you," he shrugged. "You'll work better with food in your belly." The black mechanic smirked. "Careful, kid. Keep impressing us, and he might actually start liking you." The younger one shot him a glare, but Alina couldn't help but smile faintly. Later that afternoon, a woman entered the shop with a small sedan. She explained that it stalled constantly and refused to start some mornings. The mechanics gathered around to inspect it, but Alina, standing quietly in the corner, tilted her head. She listened to the faint clicking noise when the woman tried to start it. She studied the way the lights dimmed slightly each time. "Battery connection," she whispered under her breath. The older mechanic glanced at her. "What was that?" Alina swallowed. I think the battery connection is loose, maybe corroded. That's why it struggles to start." The younger mechanic rolled his eyes, but the black one raised his brows. "Not a bad guess, let's see." They popped the hood, and sure enough the terminal was corroded, the clamp loose. The older mechanic gave a low hum of approval. "She's right again." The woman gasped softly. "A kid spotted that." Alina shifted nervously under the attention, but the older mechanic clapped her gently on the back. "Don't underestimate sharp eyes." The suited man wasn't there to scoff this time, but Alina could almost hear his voice in her head. "She's just a beggar girl." No, she thought firmly, not anymore. Every day she stepped into the shop, she was becoming something else. Someone else. The days that followed settled into a rhythm. Each morning, Alina arrived at the shop before the mechanics, broom in hand, ready to start. She swept, fetched tools, and scrubbed grease off the floor, but she also kept her ears sharp, memorizing every sound and instruction. The older mechanic had told her to learn with her eyes, and she did. She watched every twist of a wrench, every adjustment, every test. Slowly, the men grew used to her presence. The black mechanic began to quiz her when things were quiet. "What's the first thing you check when an engine won't start?" he asked one morning. Alina thought for a moment before answering. "Battery, spark plugs, fuel lines, then listen for the crank." He nodded, impressed. "Not bad." The younger mechanic, though still skeptical at times, began asking her to hand him specific tools. At first she fumbled, but within days she could find a torque wrench, socket, or pliers without hesitation. Each small success tightened her place in the shop, yet even as she proved herself, shadows of doubt lingered. At night, when she returned to her corner in the abandoned building, she wondered how long this fragile chance would last. Would the suited man step in again, trying to push her out? Would hunger return if the shop decided she wasn't worth keeping? One afternoon, a tow truck pulled in with a broken-down SUV. The driver hopped out, muttering about how it had died on the highway. The mechanic circled around as the hood creaked open. Alina lingered nearby, her hands clutching her broom handle. The older mechanic glanced at her. "All right, kid. Let's see what you've got. Tell us what's wrong." Her heart hammered in her chest. This was more than sweeping or suggesting. It was a test. She stepped forward, peering into the engine. She leaned closer, listening. The faint smell of burnt oil hung heavy. Her eyes narrowed at the cracked gasket near the valve cover. "The gasket's leaking," she said slowly. "Oil's burning off the block. That's why it stalled. It's overheating." The black mechanic bent down, checking where she pointed. He let out a low whistle. "She's right, again." The younger mechanic muttered, "How does she keep spotting this stuff?" The older one's voice was steady. "Because she's listening, just like her father did." Alina's chest tightened at the mention of him. She tried to hide her emotion, but the older mechanic caught the flicker in her eyes. "You miss him, don't you?" he asked softly. She nodded, barely able to speak. "Every day." The older man placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then honor him by keeping that gift alive. Don't let anyone, especially yourself, convince you that you don't belong here." Her throat burned, but she managed a small, firm nod. For the first time since losing her father, Alina felt as though she wasn't just surviving. She was becoming what he had always believed she could be. By the end of the week, Alina was no longer just the girl who swept the floors. She was the quiet presence always hovering near the engines, eyes sharp, ears tuned, hands ready to help. The mechanics had stopped laughing at her entirely. Even the younger one, who had been the most doubtful, now watched her with reluctant respect. Still, the suited man remained a shadow over her progress. He appeared occasionally, his polished shoes clicking across the shop floor, his gaze sweeping over her as though she were still an intruder. He never said much, but his silence carried weight. One afternoon, as the men worked on a customer's sedan, the suited man leaned against the doorway, arms folded. "So, she's still here," he said flatly. The older mechanic straightened, his voice calm but firm. "She's earned her place." The suited man's lips twisted into a smirk. "Earned? She's a child. You're wasting your time." Alina's chest tightened, but before she could speak, the black mechanic cut in. "You saw what she did. Twice. She's no ordinary kid." The younger mechanic surprised even himself when he added, "She learns faster than anyone I've trained." The suited man's smirk faltered. His eyes settled on Alina. "Then prove it again. Right now." He gestured toward the sedan, its engine sputtering weakly. "Fix this. Alone." The shop fell silent. The older mechanic's jaw tightened. "That's not fair." But Alina stepped forward. "I'll do it." Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled. The men stepped back as she leaned over the hood. The engine clicked and rattled, the smell of exhaust sharp in the air. She closed her eyes, shutting out the pressure of their stares, and listened. "Engines talk if you listen, kiddo." Her father's words steadied her heartbeat. She opened her eyes and began her inspection. The spark plugs were worn but not dead. The fuel lines were intact. Then she spotted it, the air intake hose sagging loose, barely connected. Each time the engine tried to pull in air, it faltered. Her small fingers worked quickly, tightening the clamp, resecuring the hose. She adjusted the seal, wiping sweat from her brow before stepping back. "Try it now." The younger mechanic turned the key. The engine sputtered once, then smoothed into a steady rumble. The black mechanic grinned. "There it is." The older one's eyes softened, pride shining through. "Well done, kid." But the suited man remained silent, his smirk gone. He studied her with narrowed eyes, as though recalculating everything he thought he knew about her. Finally, he turned on his heel and walked away without a word. Alina exhaled slowly, her knees weak. She had done it again. Not for food this time, not for pity, but to prove she belonged. And she had. That night, Alina didn't return to the abandoned building. Instead, she lingered near the shop until the men finished closing up. The older mechanic noticed her hovering by the door, clutching her backpack. "You've got nowhere else to go, do you?" he asked gently. Alina hesitated, then shook her head. "I sleep in an old building, but it's not safe." The black mechanic frowned. "Kid, you can't keep doing that. It's dangerous out there." The younger mechanic shifted awkwardly, scratching the back of his neck. "We've got a small break room. Couch isn't much, but it's better than the street." Alina's eyes widened. "You'd let me stay?" The older mechanic nodded. "For now. Until we figure something better out." Tears pricked her eyes, but she quickly blinked them back. "Thank you." That night, for the first time in years, she slept under a roof that wasn't crumbling above her. The couch was lumpy, and the room smelled faintly of oil and rubber, but to her it was heaven. She clutched her backpack against her chest and whispered into the quiet, "I'm not alone anymore, Dad." The next morning, she woke before dawn. Determined to prove she was worth their kindness, she cleaned the shop before anyone arrived, sweeping, wiping down counters, even organizing stray bolts and screws. When the younger mechanic walked in, still half asleep, he blinked at the spotless floor. Did you do all this?" Alina nodded nervously. "I wanted to help." He let out a low whistle. "Guess we've got ourselves a shopkeeper too." The black mechanic arrived next, followed by the older one, who smiled faintly at the sight. "Good initiative, kid, keep that up." Later that day, a frantic man pulled into the shop, his car rattling violently. Smoke puffed from under the hood, and he looked close to tears. "Please," he begged. "I've got to get to work. If I miss another shift, I'll be fired." The men sprang into action, but Alina stepped closer, drawn to the sound. The rattling wasn't random. It had rhythm, like a heartbeat out of sync. She leaned in, studying the engine. "It's the timing belt," she said softly. "It's slipping." The older mechanic checked, then nodded. "She's right." The black mechanic clapped his hands. "All right, let's fix it quick." Together they worked, this time including Alina. She held the light steady, fetched tools without being asked, and even tightened bolts under the older man's direction. For the first time, she wasn't just watching. She was part of the repair. When the car roared back to life, the customer nearly cried with relief. "Thank you, all of you. You saved my job." Alina stepped back, grease streaking her hands, but pride glowing in her chest. The older mechanic gave her a nod that said more than words ever could. "You belong here." Word began to spread. At first it was just whispers, customers mentioning the little girl at the shop who notices things others miss. Some thought it was a rumor, others laughed it off. But slowly, more people started showing up, curious to see if the story was true. Alina didn't notice at first. She was too focused on learning, holding the flashlight steady, wiping grease from her hands, listening closely to the mechanic's explanations. But the men noticed. They exchanged looks when new customers lingered just a little too long, eyes drifting toward the young girl working quietly in the corner. One afternoon, a woman pulled up in a minivan. She stepped out, glancing at Alina with skepticism. "Is it true that a girl fixed your cars?" The older mechanic wiped his hands on a rag. "It's true, she's got sharp eyes." "Go ahead. Let her take a look." Alina's cheeks burned, but she stepped toward the van. The woman crossed her arms, watching closely as Alina listened to the engine struggle. She crouched down, peered at the wheels, then pointed. "Your brake pads are worn down to the metal," she said softly. "That grinding sound is the rotor being damaged." The woman blinked in surprise. The older mechanic checked and confirmed it with a nod. The customer shook her head in disbelief, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Well, I'll be. Guess the rumors were true." As days turned into weeks, Alina grew more confident. She still swept and cleaned, but now the mechanics let her help with minor tasks, tightening bolts, replacing filters, checking fluids. Each job felt like another step closer to the dream her father had planted in her. One evening, as the shop grew quiet, the younger mechanic leaned against a workbench, watching her sort bolts into labeled jars. "You know," he said, "you're changing this place." Alina glanced up. "Me?" "Yeah. Used to be this was just another shop. Now, customers come asking about you." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Never thought I'd see the day a kid would steal the spotlight." Alina flushed, unsure how to respond, but deep down warmth bloomed in her chest. For once she wasn't invisible. But not everyone was pleased. Late one night, the suited man returned. His polished shoes echoed against the concrete as he stepped inside, his sharp eyes locking on Alina. "You've made quite the name for yourself," he said coldly. "People are talking, but don't think that means you belong." Alina stiffened, clutching a rag in her hands. "I'm not here for fame. I'm here to work, to learn." The suited man's smirk was razor thin. "Work won't save you. This world eats people like you alive. Don't forget that." His words lingered long after he left, heavy and poisonous. But Alina whispered to herself in the empty shop, steady and fierce, "I'm not afraid, not anymore." The suited man's warning echoed in Alina's mind for days. Each time she tightened a bolt or fetched a tool, his voice resurfaced. "This world eats people like you alive." Yet every time doubt crept in, she forced herself to remember her father's voice instead. "Engines don't lie, kiddo. Trust what you know." The shop kept her busy. More customers arrived, some out of curiosity, others in genuine need. Alina continued to prove herself, her small hands growing steadier with every repair. The mechanics began to treat her less like an outsider and more like one of their own. One afternoon, a man pulled in with a delivery truck, his face pale with worry. "Please," he begged. "If this doesn't run, I can't make my deliveries. My whole week depends on this truck." The older mechanic motioned toward Alina. "Kid, want to give it a try?" She hesitated, nerves twisting inside her, but she nodded. Stepping forward, she listened closely as the engine sputtered weakly. A faint knocking sound tapped like a heartbeat out of rhythm. Her eyes narrowed. "The spark plugs are fouled, and the distributor caps cracked. That's why it keeps misfiring." The younger mechanic checked, and his jaw tightened. "She's right, again." Working together, they replaced the parts. When the engine roared back to life, the customer's relief was so intense that he grabbed Alina's hand, thanking her over and over. "You saved me," he said. "I'll never forget this." Alina pulled her hand back shyly, but her smile was radiant. That night, after the shop closed, the older mechanic called her over. He sat on a stool, his face thoughtful. "Kid, you've got more than talent, you've got grit. That's what sets you apart." Alina shifted nervously. "Do you really think I could be a mechanic? For real?" He nodded firmly. "It's not about could. It's about will. And you will, if you keep pushing." Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Thank you for believing in me." The black mechanic leaned in from the corner, grinning. "Don't get too soft on her, old man. She still owes us 100 floor sweeps." Alina laughed, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in a long time. But as hope grew inside her, so did the attention. Whispers spread beyond the neighborhood. A few customers mentioned that even other shops were talking about the girl who fixes engines. Some doubted it, calling it a trick. Others were curious enough to come see for themselves. The younger mechanic warned her one evening, "Not everyone's going to like this. Some people hate being shown up, especially by a kid." Alina's face hardened. "Then let them come. I'll show them too." The older mechanic smiled faintly, pride glimmering in his eyes. The world had once mocked her for asking to fix an engine for food. Now slowly it was starting to notice her for what she truly was, her father's daughter. It wasn't long before the whispers turned into something bigger. One morning, as Alina swept the shop, a journalist arrived with a cameraman in tow. The sight startled everyone. The men exchanged uncertain looks, and Alina froze, broom in hand. The reporter smiled warmly. "We've been hearing about a remarkable girl fixing cars here. Mind if we ask a few questions?" Alina's heart pounded. She wasn't ready for attention. She just wanted to learn, to survive. But the older mechanic stepped forward, his tone protective. "She's here to work, not to be a headline." The reporter nodded respectfully, but her eyes lingered on Alina. Work or not, people deserve to know stories like hers. Alina lowered her gaze, unsure. But inside, a flicker of pride grew. People were noticing not because she begged, but because she fixed. That afternoon, a difficult case rolled in. A sleek black car with electronic systems far newer than anything Alina had worked on. The suited man stood nearby, arms folded, clearly waiting for her to fail. "This isn't some rusty pickup," he said coolly. "Let's see if the miracle girl can handle something modern." Alina swallowed hard, leaning over the hood. The array of wires and sensors looked intimidating. For a moment, doubt threatened to crush her. Then she closed her eyes and remembered, "Don't fear the noise. Understand it." She listened, tracing the faint whir of the starter, the sluggish response of the ignition. Opening her eyes, she spotted a frayed wire near the battery sensor. "It's here," she said firmly, pointing. "The sensor wire's damaged. That's why the system won't respond." The black mechanic checked, then let out a laugh. She nailed it. The suited man's jaw tightened as the repair was made, and the car purred to life. He said nothing, only turned and walked away, his polished shoes clicking in frustration. Later that evening, the mechanics gathered around her in the quiet shop. The younger one shook his head in disbelief. "Kid, you're making us look bad. You know that, right?" Alina flushed. "I don't mean to." He grinned faintly. "Nah, it's good. You push us to be sharper." The older mechanic leaned against the counter, his voice steady. "The truth is, you've already proven more than most apprentices do in months. But don't let success make you careless. Every engine's a new challenge. Treat each one with respect." Alina nodded, her voice soft but sure. "I will." That night, lying on the shop's couch, she stared at the ceiling. For the first time since losing her father, she allowed herself to imagine a future, not one of hunger and loneliness, but of belonging, of skill, of purpose. Whispers of doubt still haunted her, but hope was louder now, and she clung to it with everything she had. The crowd had slowly started to disperse, their laughter fading into murmurs and whispers, leaving the girl and the mechanic alone in the dimly lit garage. She wiped the grease off her hands with a rag, but the smile on her face hadn't faded. She was tired, yes, but there was a spark in her eyes, one that refused to be dimmed by mockery. "Not bad," the mechanic finally said, leaning on the edge of the hood, watching her work. "Most people wouldn't even know where to start with this engine." She shrugged casually, pretending not to care, though inside her chest was pounding with pride. "I guess I just like fixing things," she said softly. "Cars, engines, machines. I like making them run again." The mechanic nodded, impressed despite himself. "You've got skill, real skill, and a level of patience most people don't even know they need. You weren't pretending out there. You knew exactly what you were doing." Her eyes flicked toward the empty street outside, where the echo of laughter still lingered. "They don't get it," she murmured. "They see a girl on the street, think she's nothing. But I've been fixing engines since I was 12. My dad taught me." Her voice caught slightly. Before everything changed." The mechanic glanced at her, sensing the layers beneath her confident exterior. "Yeah," he said quietly. "People judge too fast. They don't see the work, the skill, the heart behind it." She looked back at the engine she had been working on, brushing her hair back from her face. "I've been homeless for a long time, living on the streets, surviving day by day. But I've never let that stop me from learning, from fixing, from being good at something that matters to me." The mechanic leaned back, genuinely impressed. "You've got guts and talent. You know what that means. If you keep going, keep learning, you could be the best. People would have to take notice eventually." She laughed softly, a mixture of disbelief and hope. "Best? A homeless girl fixing cars? They'd never see that coming." "Exactly," the mechanic said with a grin. "And that's your advantage. Nobody expects you to have this skill, but you do. And that means you can take control of your life, your own way." The girl's eyes glimmered with determination. She picked up a wrench, adjusted a bolt, and smiled to herself. "I'm not asking for food anymore," she whispered. "I'm asking for a chance." And in that moment, surrounded by the smell of oil and metal, A kind of quiet victory filled the air. Not the loud, mocking laughter of the street, but the satisfaction of proving herself, silently, to herself. Because she wasn't just a girl on the street, she was a Motorhead. She was unstoppable. And soon, the world would finally see it. The next morning, the girl returned to the garage, but this time with a different sense of purpose. Word had started to spread. People had whispered about the homeless girl who had fixed a broken-down car in the middle of the street, and how she had done it with nothing but skill and determination. Some still doubted, but others were curious, and curiosity has a way of turning into opportunity. The mechanic handed her a small toolbox. "Consider this a proper start," he said. "If you really want to make it, you'll need your own set of tools. You've earned it." Her hands shook slightly as she took it. It wasn't just a box of tools, it was a key to prove she wasn't defined by the streets, by the mockery, by anyone else's assumptions. She smiled, gratitude and determination mixing in her gaze. "Thank you," she whispered. A group of onlookers gathered again outside the garage, some curious, some still skeptical. One of the same people who had laughed at her before stepped closer, shaking their head. "Wait, you're the same girl? You fixed that engine yesterday?" She looked at them, her eyes calm, but piercing. "Yes," she said, tightening a bolt and letting the engine hum to life. "I fixed it, and I can fix more, because I know how." The murmurs turned into stunned silence. A few heads nodded, others stepped back, realizing that their assumptions had been wrong. They had laughed at her because they saw a girl in tattered clothes, not a Motorhead with talent, grit and determination that could outmatch most anyone. The mechanic clapped her on the shoulder. "See? Skill and heart win every time. People might doubt you, but you just proved them wrong." She nodded, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the engine. "I don't need anyone's approval," she said quietly, "but I do want them to see me for what I am, not what they think I am." The girl's story began to ripple through the neighborhood. Others started bringing cars and bikes, curious to see if the rumors were true. And with every engine she fixed, with every tire she replaced, her reputation grew, not because she asked for it, but because her skill demanded respect. By evening, she stood outside the garage, watching the sun set over the street that had once mocked her. The laughter that had followed her yesterday had vanished, replaced by whispers of admiration, astonishment and hope. She realized that the world might never stop judging, but she could control one thing: how she responded. And as she tightened the final bolt on a battered motorbike, a smile spread across her face. She didn't just fix engines, she had fixed people's perceptions too. They had underestimated her, laughed at her, but she had risen above. She whispered to herself, almost in triumph, "I don't just survive, I thrive." Because that's what she had become, not a homeless girl, not a joke to be laughed at, but a force, a Motorhead, unstoppable and unbreakable. And from that day forward, anyone who doubted her learned the same truth: never underestimate a girl with grease on her hands and fire in her heart. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more emotional, dramatic, and unexpected tales. And let us know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? We love hearing from all of you. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and keep watching.